Buenas tardes a todos, buenas tardes a toda la comunidad del Observatorio de Comercio Internacional, a toda la comunidad de la Universidad Nacional de Luján. Estamos en el 5º Congreso de Comercio Internacional y estamos en la mesa de política exterior italiana. En la jornada de hoy estaba presente con nosotros el máster Gabriel Espina. Desafortunadamente, por cuestiones técnicas y de fuerza mayor, el doctor Gabriele no ha podido asistir a la charla de hoy. Sin embargo, también teníamos, también a modo de pequeña sorpresa, la intervención de otra de las organizaciones italianas con las cuales nuestro observatorio tiene relación, con Mondo Internacional, es un think tank con sede en Milán. De esta manera, la charla de hoy, la conferencia de hoy, va a girar en torno a este tema, pero con nosotros lo tenemos a una representante, directora del Centro de Investigación de este grupo, de este think tank, Mondo Internacional, la señora Caitlin Elizabeth Rey. Entonces con nosotros está la señora Caitlin Elizabeth Rey. Ella va a disertar acerca de la política exterior italiana. Voy a leer brevemente entonces un perfil de ella, ¿sí? Antes que todo me presento, mi nombre es Federico Bergami. Yo soy licenciado en Relaciones Internacionales, especialista también en estudios chinos, y me desempeño en el área de Relaciones Internacionales, dentro del Observatorio, ¿no? ARIOSI. De esta manera vamos a comenzar con la conferencia. Brevemente voy a leer un resumen acerca de Caitlin. Ella es directora de investigación de Mondo Internacional. Nació en Ohio, Estados Unidos, donde obtuvo un Bachelor of Arts in International Studies and Italian at the Ohio State University. Durante sus estudios de grado, ella escribió una tesis sobre la subversión al régimen fascista italiano en Magreb, para el cual ella ganó una mención honorable en la Denman Undergraduate Research Journal. Estudió además francés e italiano durante sus estudios de grado y continuó sus estudios en Europa, donde lo completó con un máster en Relaciones Internacionales, y aquí también escribió una tesis sobre la estructura de gobierno de Tanzania. Mientras escribía su tesis, descubrió una afinidad por los temas de inmigración y desarrollo socioeconómico. Además de todos estos idiomas, habla también portugués y swahili. Así que también estamos hablando de una persona que sabe bastante el dominio de los idiomas. Así que bueno, buenas tardes. Entonces, desde Argentina, Caitlin, ¿estás con nosotros?
All right, hello. So yes, I'm sorry, but out of all of those languages that I've studied, and despite the fact that I'm American, Spanish is one of the languages that I've never gotten around to studying. So I'm going to have to do my presentation in English tonight. I hope that's not a problem for anybody. But yes, thank you for having me. So I know at first it seems kind of strange that I was born in the US, that I don't actually speak any Spanish out of all of the languages that I've studied, but I'm kind of looking at this concept from the outside looking in, it would appear. Basically, I'm going to do a rather, I hope it's brief. I'm going to try to be brief, and then we can discuss any questions afterward. My intervention is going to be mainly around the theme of Italian and Argentinian relations from a cultural, historical, and economic point of view. And if we have time and if there's the opportunity, I would also like to talk a little bit about the aspect of food, because obviously that's what I'm passionate about. That's what I love talking about. And I think there's the opportunity to talk about that as well. So thank you, Federico, for the presentation. And if it's okay with you, I would get started, unless you have any questions, if I can proceed.
Okay, of course, yes, you can start now. And if you want some presentation on PowerPoint or well, I don't know, any program, just start it, okay? Yes.
Okay, all right. So, yeah, so for the moment, I have no PowerPoint. For the moment, I'm just going to talk. All right, I'm just going to speak about the topic. I find it to be a bit more natural in this context. So,
no problem.
All right, so thank you. So yes, I think the relations between Italy and Argentina in particular, and I guess speaking as an American, between Italy and the Americas in general, we all kind of have an idea, we have a concept about the historical relationship that exists between Italy and the Americas. I myself have basically zero Italian origins. I have no Italian heritage whatsoever. So it seems kind of strange that I was so fascinated with the idea of Italy and the influence that Italy had on the rest of the world. But as we all know, that due to immigration and due to the influx of Italians that immigrated to the Americas, especially between approximately the 1850s and the 1950s, Italy has had a huge influence just due to the people that have arrived throughout the Americas throughout that 100-year time span. So in regards to Argentina in particular, between approximately 1870 and 1960, there were 2 million Italians that immigrated from Italy to Argentina. And I think it's interesting the dynamic of the fact that mainly Italians from southern Italy would immigrate to North America, whereas it was mainly Italians of northern Italy that would immigrate to southern America. And so throughout that time, 2 million total Italians immigrated to Argentina. And as a result, there are 2/3 of the Argentinian population, if I'm not mistaken, can claim some sort of Italian heritage or connection to Italy. And I don't know if you, Federico, have any sort of like heritage or if you can trace your lineage back to Italy in some way. But just knowing that statistic, there's probably a good likelihood that you can, for example. As a result of this influx of people moving from Italy to Argentina, obviously, there has also been a huge cultural influence on Argentina. And so, for example, some people will claim that in Argentina, there is a quote unquote modified Mediterranean diet. And what that means is it's sort of reflected in some of the dishes that are popular throughout Argentina. So, for example, pasta, which is an international dish at this, it's also popular in Argentina, of course. And another one that comes to mind, and I have to be honest, I've never had the pleasure of visiting Argentina and trying it, but there is the milanesa, which I live in Milan, I'm a resident of Milan. Mondo Internazionale has its headquarters in Milan. And the milanesa is very, very similar to the cotoletta milanese. And so we see the reflection culturally in the cuisine in certain ways. There's also the matter of architecture. So, which I believe happened organically, obviously, through the cultural influence of people that arrived from Italy to Argentina. And throughout time, architecture took on a very European, as we can say, a European taste in Argentina. And this also happened not just through the people, but through actual diplomatic relations, as we will go on to see. Actually, one of the quote unquote like points of pride that the Italian embassy in Argentina has is like the historical nature of the building and the architecture and the beauty of the building, of the Italian embassy in Buenos Aires. So Argentina architecture is also strongly influenced by Italian and European architecture thanks to this influx of people. Another aspect is, despite the fact that I do not speak Spanish, I can, however, understand it, and I can hear the actual cadence of Argentinian Spanish and how it's influenced by the Italian language. That in itself is, it tells you a lot that I do understand the fact that it is slightly different in cadence and in vocabulary, just because of the fact that I speak Italian, I'm fluent in Italian, and I can hear that. That's another aspect is linguistic. And I guess just another like fun cultural aspect that in this case, it hasn't been so much Italy influencing Argentina, but Argentina having an influence in Italy is Maradona, for example, who more than just Italy was also highly influential in Naples. He was a football player in Naples that beyond just being a football player, a soccer player, as I would say more naturally, was sort of a representative also of the relations between the common people, if we could say, between both countries. He sort of represented the common people of Napoli and also the common people of Argentina, and was sort of like a bridge between, was seen as a bridge between those two people. So besides being a soccer star, a football star, he was also like a hero of the people of the two countries. So those are just some cultural aspects that have grown out of this long historical relationship. And there's an insect, excuse me. On also a way that Argentina is now sort of going in the opposite direction in regards to cultural influence is that Italy is one of Argentina's favorite tourist destinations. You know, like it's one of the places that Argentinians love to go most. And although Italy does have this, top tourist destination, it's always on the top tourist destination of almost every country in the world, of almost every place in the world, just due to due to the beauty, due to the cuisine, due to the idyllic, picturesque places that you can go on vacation. I do believe that a lot of it, the fact that Italy is Argentina's #1 top tourist destination, does have to do with the cultural influence. And I think being an American, I can relate to this, the sort of fascination that has been born out of growing up in a context that is heavily influenced by Italian culture, and that sort of desire to see it in real life. So those are just some aspects in which there has been sort of a cultural fusion. And when we talk about the history, and I'm sorry, Federico, if you want to intervene with any questions, you can stop me at any time. Just let me know, okay? Or we can wait until the end. All right. When we come to the history, as you mentioned in my biography, I'm mostly interested in, I would say, the era up until up through the fascist era of Italian history, and that's also one of the eras in which there were the strongest. I think there were the basis for diplomatic relations that were being built between Italy and Argentina was up through that period. Obviously, more happened afterward, but I think some of the most fascinating dynamics took place in that time period. So obviously, we know that once upon a time, Argentina was a Spanish colony, and once upon a time, Italy was not a unified country. It was a series of kingdoms and regions and not colonies, but areas that were subject, especially to Spanish influence and suburban influence. And so we can't really talk within the mid 1800s. We can't really talk about an actual Italian-Argentinian relationship that was being built. But we can talk about relationships that were being built between entities that are now a part of what is current the Argentinian Republic and Italy. So the first actual diplomatic accord, which was the Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation deal, occurred between the Kingdom of Sardinia and the Argentine Confederation, which was recently independent. So this accord was signed in 1885 between what is now a small part of Italy and a newly independent Argentina. So something very, 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 what can I say, a predecessor to what we would consider an actual diplomatic relation today. And then, of course, other things happened. Italy unified, etc., etc. But it wasn't until 1924 when the first actual embassy of Italy was opened in Argentina. Before this point, it was not an actual embassy. It was more just an unofficial diplomatic point of contact. And the significance of 1924 was that the embassy was opened mainly with the purpose of the fascist regime's idea to establish a sort of outreach program to Italians living abroad. And so people of Italian descent, people of Italian citizenship, it was the fascist regime's attempt basically to have some sort of influence over Italians that were living in other countries. And that was actually the birth of the first Italian embassy in Argentina. Following this, the fascist regime then lasted approximately 20 years or so. Following this, Juan Peron, so even after the fall of fascism and even after the end of World War II, he had visited Italy during the fascist regime. And so when he came to power in 1946, he was inspired by certain elements of fascism, of Italian fascism, and attempted to adopt certain elements of Mussolini's version of fascism that he had witnessed, during his visit to Italy. And one of the main elements that he most tried to incorporate into his regime in Argentina was the fascist idea of corporatism. So essentially that, for example, in a capitalist society, it's more a free hand management of the market. But in a corporate society, what Peron tried to implement from the fascist regime was the idea that society would be divided into different corporations like labor, agriculture, manufacturing, etc., that would then be subservient to the state. So he was inspired by certain elements of fascism. And related to that, and probably depending on who you ask, an even more famous person than Juan Peron was Evita Peron, who also was engaged in official diplomatic relations with Italy, with I think was a very fascinating objective. So Evita Peron, who some in Argentina considered to be the nation's spiritual leader because she would adopt aspects of Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary in order to solidify this role as the nation's spiritual leader. In 1947, she visited Rome with the express purpose of creating a third pole of influence. So we're talking about like post-Yalta conference when the two poles of influence were decided, the East and the West, essentially. And Evita Peron went to Rome with the purpose of establishing a third pole of influence amongst Catholic nations. And the way that she saw that this pole of influence would work was under the leadership of Argentina and Italy together. And so it's obviously this never came to fruition, it never came to realization, but it's also just very fascinating to think about the alternative world that was imagined under the leadership of these two countries at a certain point. So yeah, and that I found to be extremely interesting. In regards to commerce and trade, because obviously we can talk about political and diplomatic relations, but in regards to commerce and trade, the first Italian Chamber of Commerce was opened in the Argentinian Republic in 1884. And there have obviously been a series of bilateral agreements between the countries. As of right now, there is a very large number of Italian businesses operating in Argentina. And I would also be interested, obviously, of hearing about Argentinian businesses that operate in Italy, but I'm mostly speaking about the Italian side that operates in Argentina. There are approximately 250 Italian businesses operating in Argentina currently, most of which operate in manufacturing, so especially cars, like Fiat, for example. And so that sort of goes to show, beyond just diplomatic relations, official diplomatic relations, there are also very strong economic connections that happening between the two countries. And to break out of the bilateral mindset just between Italy and Argentina, on a multilateral level, which I think is equally as important as the bilateral level. In 2019, for example, was an EU-Mercosur agreement that was signed. Seeing as the EU is Mercosur's #1 trade and investment partner, and the EU is also Mercosur's #1 biggest foreign investor, obviously in 2019 there had to be some sort of multilateral deal in regards to trade to help regulate and align both of the regional agreements on certain aspects. And so what I think is really fascinating are the priorities of this 2019 trade agreement. So the main priorities of the 2019 EU-Mercosur agreement are a lowering of tariff and non-tariff barriers to help facilitate trade and between the two areas, between the two zones, an alignment and a strengthening of rules in general, of trade rules, of economic rules, and also of promoting values, which obviously I think in any sort of agreement or in any sort of organization or anything is the main basis from which you need to depart in order to have a successful relationship. And the main values that are promoted in the 2019 agreement are, for example, corporate responsibility, worker protection, environmental protection, and actually one of the factors that is mentioned several times in this agreement is the idea of food safety. And I think especially Argentina has a huge role to play in the whole food safety concept, because Argentina has a huge agricultural sector, and especially in meat. Food safety is essential for meat exports and for meeting finding alignment on food safety within meat exports. So I think Argentina is going to play a particularly important role in the idea of food safety within the EU. Not within the EU, but with the EU at this point. And so that is a general overview. As I said, very brief, very overall, nothing too in detail. But I think through all of this, a common motif is the role of human know-how and the exchange of ideas as a sort of literal and figurative sculptor of an socioeconomic landscape. So the fact that there have been so many exchanges of knowledge between the two countries has literally, like in the case of architecture, shaped the landscape of Argentina, for example. And it has led to lots of more stimulation of economic activity, and not only of cultural activity as well between the two countries. And I will conclude with that. I tried to be brief, so if you have any questions or you want any more details on anything, please, I am available.
Okay. First of all, yes, we have to see if there is any comment on YouTube, but also yes, I would like to ask you about the recent elections in Italy. So it's a new the election of Giorgia Meloni, so that's a problem for many people. Let's see this like a problem. So what do you think about this? Because she said that she puts she said about the citizen and the idea of put in an end of give the citizen to anybody, and we have to contain this aspect of the Italian state. So this idea, so many people now in Argentina, because there is a lot of people of descendant of Italian in Argentina, and maybe also in United States and other countries that you can obtain a double citizenship. That's very important. So there is a big immigration now. For example, I don't know how is the case of United States, but in Argentina there are many people who travel to Italy like tourists, and in a few months you can obtain Italian citizen. Okay, you present the documents, and you and then you are Italian. So that's very simple. It's very easy in this sense. So Giorgia Meloni has another view, has a strong view. Some people call her fascist. So that's many people. I don't know what I have to think about her, but I would like to know your opinion about this one.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking, I think we can divide this question up into a few different questions, actually, a few different matters. I think one of the roles that the idea of citizenship by blood has played in Italy has been that of the fact that Italy is facing a population crisis, a demographic crisis. So fewer and fewer people are having children, and there's an issue with the immigration away from Italy. Like historically, there's always been, there is also now, and in particular, there's an issue with educated people or particularly skilled people moving abroad, looking for greater opportunities abroad. And so I do believe that a part of the idea of citizenship by blood, and as you said, the relative ease with which you can present a request for citizenship if you are of Italian heritage and can prove it, is due to the fact that there is an undeniable demographic crisis happening in Italy right now. Yes. And that is going to continue to influence the decisions around citizenship and who can obtain citizenship for governments for the foreseeable future. Because I cannot predict when the demographic crisis will end, or if it will ever end, or how it will morph and change. But it is something that all future governments of any part of the political spectrum will have to consider in the future. And so that's what I have to say about the citizenship and how that's going to be faced. In regards to Giorgia Meloni and how this will be handled, I cannot tell how she will be handling that policy in particular. But I do believe that, as I said, everyone of every party is aware of the fact that there is this demographic crisis, and it's going to be one of the major policy shapers across immigration, across youth employment, across education, across all factors of policy making, essentially.
Okay, so that's an interesting topic. And I don't know if Gustavo is here. I don't know if there is some comments in the group. I see, let me see. Let me see the comments. If there is. So I don't know if no, we don't have comments here. I see. No. So by the moment, no, we don't have comments. Okay, that I think that was very interesting to know the perspective of another Italian part from USA, another Italian perspective. And okay, so it's very interesting to know also the idea of the Italian fascist, the Italian regime in Maghreb and in Africa. So this is part of the negative history. Obviously, it's part of the untold Italy. Yes, it's part of the history of this country. So we don't have comments. So I don't know, Gustavo is here. Gustavo, no sé si estás acá. Bueno, Gustavo, no sé si hemos terminado. Bueno, no, Gustavo no. Pero bueno, de todas formas, bueno, y creo que, bueno, si no hay comentarios, si no hay preguntas, hemos llegado al fin. Así que, bueno, le agradecemos a todo el público que está haciendo este congreso muy importante. Muchísimas gracias. Hemos tenido la participación de la doctora Kathleen Elizabeth Wright. Bueno, ella es investigadora, directora de investigación de Mondo Internacional. Ha estado hablando con nosotros acerca de las relaciones entre Italia y Argentina en sus investigaciones. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos los presentes. Y bueno, los invitamos también a que sigan el Congreso y que sigan con la siguiente mesa durante la jornada de hoy jueves y bueno, también mañana viernes. Así que bueno, muchísimas gracias. Kathleen, molte grazie. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, vamos a volver a verte. O sea, see you soon. Okay.
Yes, see you soon. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Thank you. All right. Have a great day at this point.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.